So here we are to talk about data. And one of the things that I found was that getting a PhD in engineering, I loved data. It was really cool. And my job was to take that data and make meaning of it. And that's kind of where we are in social media today. So in a world that's increasingly digital and increasingly social, there's a new wave of brand building. Brands are now social experiences. So if you think back in the old days, we would create content, we would push it out, and so now we're actually having to create experiences. Brands are digital activities and digital experiences. And so what customers are really looking for is they're not really interested in the content for content's sake. They're interested in taking that content and creating an experience out of that. So take, for instance, this is George's Facebook page, and if you visit it, what you'll see is there are over 3 million people talking about this. And that statistic is more important than likes, and the reason is because that shows engagement. So let's take a look at one photo. So this is the wall photo, and this, we're gonna look at how widespread this particular photo went. So this is a video map of how viral photos spread, and this is one piece of content that was shared by his fans. So each of the visualizations starts with George, and as each branch grows, it re-splits off into many other arcs. And the colors are gender, and some of the reshares actually spawn new generations of shares. And this looks at from July to September in 2012. So you can kind of, and Stamen did this as kind of a really interesting way to visualize data, which is, I think, one of the problems with data in general, is how do we look at it and how do we make sense of it? So if you take that one piece of content and look at its viral nature, and now compound it by the fact that there are over 3 billion pieces of content shared each week. So the question is, as marketers, as PR directors, as digital agencies, as social media experts, how do we make sense of all of this? So what we can notice here is that people are really acting on content. So we go back to the old days where there was some content that was contained inside a firewall in mainframes or the client-server world, and then the internet sprung, and now we're in the mode of social, mobile, and big data. And the conversation around big data is really about, we have all this data, how do we make sense of it? And we also sing, bring your own technology to work. So not only do we have people interacting at home, but they're bringing their mobile devices and they're interacting at work. And so now that's even become an issue for IT, right? How do you govern that? How do you share that? And how do you make sense of this? So really what I see is that marketers are in the business of making connections in a constantly evolving ecosystem. And I just had a big hug with my friend Sanjay back there. We were both commenting on how fast this world is changing and how difficult it is to keep up. And it's definitely drinking from the fire hose. And so hugs are really precious. That's just my personal opinion. So in my opinion, there is a lot of value in the social currency. And when I get asked to speak, a lot of times with executives who aren't necessarily on board, so I would guess most of you in this room are early adopters or innovators. You buy into social, you get it, and now you're having to explain to what I would call the pragmatists. So I'm really talking about Geoffrey Moore's technology adoption curve. I took that and I kind of looked at it as how is this evolving in corporate America? And so what's really interesting to me is that we have this whole industry, now we're in the middle of big data, and we really haven't mastered the social business case. And so back in 2008, when I was at Forrester, I wrote the world's first social media ROI calculator. Back then, nobody cared. It's now becoming something that people do care about because we're really asking, okay, so we have social media. Is it possible to give attribution? And after I speak, there's going to be a great panel talking about this in detail. what I found really interesting as I was watching the Twitter streams is that a lot of people think it's too fluffy to measure. The data is too difficult to measure. And so you see the conversation, well, would you calculate the ROI of a phone? I mean, it's kind of like it's ubiquitous, right? Everybody has a phone. Or what about the ROI of your mom? And then there was one really cute tweet about putting on your pants in the morning. I think there is a return on investment for that. In fact, I think there is an ROI for anything that truly provides value. And the quandary that we're in right now is really trying to figure out how do we make sense of this. And I thought this infographic was kind of funny because someone actually took the meme and turned it into a calculation. So if we can calculate the ROI of our mom, we can calculate the ROI of social media. It just requires a new kind of discipline. So for marketers, what's the goal of all this, posting all this content? Well, in the traditional sense, it's really to look at increasing positive sentiment, share of voice, awareness, interest, and consideration. I saw a tweet from yesterday about the marketing funnel is now the pretzel funnel. And it's kind of true because it used to be a linear model, and now it's kind of all over the place. What drives consideration might drive awareness. And what we're really looking for, even if you're not a marketer, is increased lead conversion rates and sales. And at the end of the day, what we really want are loyalty, brand advocacy, and referrals. Because we know, as Tom Peter calculated 25 years ago, it is cheaper to market to someone who's already on board with your company than it is to acquire a new customer. And one of the things that when I talk to executives about social media, and they say, Dr. Nat, don't tell anybody, but I'm not really sure I get this stuff. Could you tell me what it is, but don't tell anybody I don't know? So I'm like, okay, in confidence, I will tell you. And as a young engineer, I worked for a large company, and it was General Electric, and they put me in the position of creating tungsten carbide tool bits. Yay. So here I am, just graduated from University of Michigan, very excited, and this is the first job I landed. Loved being in GE, but I wasn't really quite sure. You're probably wondering, why is she talking about social media if she has a PhD in engineering? I'll tell you, I turned lead into gold. So back to my story. So I'm sitting in the meeting, and there's engineers, and there's marketing people, and there's the sales people, and like every functional group is there, and they're arguing about our production and what we should focus on. So the salespeople were saying, well, we make these tungsten carbide tool bits and we cover them with this substance called titanium nitride. And what you need to know about that is it's gold in color. A little bit softer than the other ones. And the engineers are going, no, look at the data, look at the hardness, look at the strength. Those white ones, aluminum oxide covering, they last longer. They're better for our clients. Our clients are gonna like that. So I'm sitting there listening, and of course, your first job, you always wanna make a contribution. So I raised my hand and I said, have we ever asked our customers? Oh, the room bursts into laughter. Natalie, why would we ask our customers? They don't know what they want. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So after the meeting, I went to my boss and I said, hey, can I have two of the gold one and the white one? I want to go and talk to a couple people, some of the machinists in the local machine shops here in Detroit. He's like, okay, but clock out because I'm not paying you to go do a customer focus group. I'm like, okay, and I was really determined. And I don't know if this is like something in my DNA that I can't help myself, but I really wanted to know what the customer thought. Because to me, it made sense. Why wouldn't we make what the customer wanted? So I go to the machine shops, and I'm standing in front of these guys who've been machinists for 30 years, right? This is their career. I hold up the two bits, and I say, which one do you like better and why? Really, really simple data. And they go, oh, we love the gold one. I said, really? It's not as hard, and it doesn't last as long. And they said, yes, but it makes us feel happy. So what I tell CEOs is that social media is really understanding what your customer is thinking and saying, what your competitors are doing, and really trying to make sense of that so we can make better business decisions, so that we're here for the long run. So if people are sharing more than ever, what do marketers need? Well, I teach a course at Anderson, and it's one of the first business courses in a university on social media, so I'm very proud to represent. And I was starting to look at the 6 steps that one, and we just made these up randomly, to try to contain this process. So step 1 is monitoring and listening, and we'll talk a little bit more later in the talk about how this has evolved. We look at measurement, we look at audience, right? What do we know about the audience, their likes, their dislikes, where they live, how do we interact with them? And then content. So if we really have measured and we really have monitored and we really understand that audience, now it makes sense that we create content that is really what that audience wants. And now we can take that content and we can become digital experiences and digital activities. And step 6 is just basically about the politics, which we all know what that is. Not a lot of advice that I can tell you, except my boss told me 2 things: let the house burn down and fly under the radar. I still have a hard time, even though I got that advice 30 years ago, I still have a really hard time. I guess I'm an advocate, I don't know. So this structure gives us a way to think about how brands are doing, where our company is, and we actually built an assessment process around this and some research. So let's look at the monitoring part. Competitive intelligence has evolved. It used to be keyword, and now it's really about the interest graph, and it's based on the context of consumers and their collective actions. So imagine that we could actually collect online a perspective about the machinists. And what's interesting, here's another tip that I've used a lot and given to a lot of my clients, is that when the CEO or someone in your organization doesn't quite get it, what I do is I go out to Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, and I actually collect screenshots of what the customer's saying, the good stuff and the bad stuff. And then and on the bad stuff, I say, you know, here's something maybe we should be taking a look at. Well, when they see it, they're like, oh, can we take this down? This is horrible. Tell them to stop. And that's really where you see the new paradigm, where they don't get that brands are what your customers say you are. So to really make sound business decisions, we need insight into our customers' actions. We need to know what drives the most engagement and the most interaction. And we want to know what type of content to create, right? Is it video? Is it photos? Is it posts? Both Catherine and I love to write, so we hope that people care, but I'm going to show you some interesting data that says maybe we should become photographers. Where are people interacting, and when are they interacting? So I posed the question to the audience. Raise your hand. Wouldn't it be worth knowing what's relevant to your audience? The answer is yes. Thank you for playing. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure you're not sleeping. I see Sanjay back there smiling. I see Brian back there smiling. It's so nice to have friends in the audience. So as a professor and a consultant, I was looking for something to help me measure some of this stuff. And so there's a new kind of social media optimization based on industry reports. And it really leverages social media data, and it provides a competitive analysis and a look at brand engagement. And what it does for marketers is it allows them to evaluate content. So kind of what we went over before is what's the best type of content, what type, when to post, and where to post. So I'm going to show you a report. These reports are free. Anybody can access them. And this one I just did on the fashion industry. And we look at these different brands. And so in the first chart, what you see is the volume of content posted for all these brands. So the first thing, if you were among this group, is you can start to see who's posting the most content and where you stand with respect to that, right? Important data. And now you could use this kind of a chart to say to your organization, you know, we're leading it, we need to keep leading it, don't take away my budget. Or you would be able to say, you know what, we're way behind the 8 ball. We really need help. We need to figure out, what we're going to do about the content budget. This post, this data was really interesting. So performance versus content type. If someone had asked me to predict this, I would have said video. And what's really interesting here is that photos are the most shared. And if you think about that, so you think about interaction dynamics, and you think about time. And so one of the things that I've noticed as being a, social media professional, I'm not even sure what to call myself, is that time is really precious. And so for me as a person, I'm honestly in the middle of social fatigue. I'm tired, right? And I'm one of the people who posts the most, or I used to post the most. And so if you think about the time allocation of your customers, I think the reason that this data, and we're going to look at this more in our report, is that photos don't require a whole lot of engagement. They're easy to look at. It takes a nanosecond or two. You like it, you share it, you retweet it, right? And so now if you had data like this for your industry, you would be able to look at what kind of content gets the most interactions, and now start to really think about your creative strategy around, if photos are one of the most popular ones, how are you doing that, or are you? Now this looks at, I know this is really hard to see, but we'll make all the slides available. And this is looking at post volume, so likes and comments. And what's interesting here is Refinery 29 has the most Facebook posts. And when we look at tweets, which is, this is retweets, Refinery 29 has the most retweets. Now here's something even more interesting. Now let's look at engagement effectiveness. So this looks at likes and shares for Facebook. And so while BB did not have the most content, so let's go back and look at posts, right? Facebook and Twitter. What you see is the content that they did have had the most interaction. So you as a marketer, that's this interesting data, right? This is data that you can now start to study and to figure out, why is that so? And so what this shows you is the top content on Facebook based on engagement. And so you can start to look at, what are my competitors doing? What am I doing? What has the most comments, the most likes? And now I can really look at my creative strategy and decide, am I on the right path, or maybe I'm not? Let's look at Twitter engagement. So what's interesting here is, and if we go back, we look at Abercrombie. So not a lot of tweets, not a lot of Facebook posts, but what's interesting is this content that they do have gets a lot of engagement on Twitter. And now you can take a look at the content and the interaction. So if we go back to the UCLA model, the first is doing this new kind of monitoring and listening. The second is, how am I going to measure? Well, this is an interesting measurement system. And now I can really study that audience. And now I can start to make better decisions about content and about interactions. So this is a way of starting to take that giant sea of information, that big data problem, and filtering it so that it makes sense for you and your business. What you really get is kind of a competitive dashboard, so that you can now see, okay, so competitor one is doing this much on Facebook, this much on Twitter and YouTube, and I can start to compare and figure out, where do I want to be in that list? You can also start to look at the type of content. So is it video? Is it user generated? Is it tweets? Is it photographs? And now you can start to really think about, you can also look at the content and when it posts and how it posts, and what gets the most interaction per day of the week, per hour of the day. And now you can actually start to take all this data, this big data, right? And kind of the topic here is great marketing comes from great data. And our conundrum is to make sense of the data. So if you had this information about content and about your data, then you could actually create a strategic marketing calendar where you could determine on Monday, where am I posting, Facebook or Twitter? What content do I need to repost? Most marketers, what I'm finding is they don't really understand EdgeRank. And for those of you who wouldn't raise your hand or don't know, what EdgeRank does is it looks at when the brand posts, and it looks at the affinity between the brand and what wall they're posting to. And over 90% of the content that most brands post does not get seen by their customers. So that's even more concerning when here you are taking a huge amount of dollars around content and really looking at how do I focus that and how do I get the best return on the investment. And so the ability to know when to post and when to repost content is really important. And then you can start to look at what's trending and how many posts, when is a good time to post a lot. And what we're finding in the studies is that by altering your content programming, engagement can increase by 30% or more. So what I've shown you is a real-time competitive intelligence about customers, about competitors, and about engagement. And so if I go back to think about my machinist friends, how engaged they were with those tungsten carbide tool bits, and what they were talking about and what they really cared about, if I had the ability to take that data back to my management, which I eventually did, they still made the white ones, right? I mean, common sense doesn't run deep and wide in corporate America. And that's why we have step 6, which is politics and how to navigate that. What I find is that now I would really be able to make the best business decisions. And so this conference today that Catherine and the team here has put together for you is really about how do we make sense of this, how do we measure it, and what are our next steps. And so everything, at the end of the day, if our brands are digital experiences and social experiences, what we really want to know is how to take big data to content decisions to customer engagement. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're after. And another thing that's really important is looking at ad optimization data, right? So if you have this context of all this information and you were going to post ads, you might want to use data like this to look at that. This is the URL for the industry report, so you just go to the site, you can pick the type of industry that you're in, and then just run the report. And so that's it. That's what I have for you today.
Am I live here? Oh, okay. Does anybody have questions? So you'll find that I have a lot of questions. It's just what I do. So one thing that you pointed to, and it's something that we're seeing all over, is just the popularity of photographic content, and that's really wonderful. But there are a lot of brands that don't really have this huge reservoir of wonderful things to, take pictures of. And my sense is that they have to get in on this game. They just have to find a way. So I wondered what your thoughts might be on how you can kind of change your brand strategy around being more visual and all that, when clearly that's a very important trend.
So I have two stories. One is I was working with external hard drives. Another fun project, almost as fun as the tungsten carbide tool bits. And so they said to us, our sales are down, help. So we started to look at it, we did some mystery shopping, and we went into the Best Buy kind of stores, and we said we wanted this brand, and it was Life Studio by Hitachi. And what they said was, the salespeople said, oh, well, there's this extra software on the external hard drives, and it takes up space, and that's really not a good idea. They're cheating you, kind of. So buy these other competitors. So the mystery shopping gave us that interesting data. So then when we went back to the company, we said, well, what is this software? And they said, oh, we were sad to hear that, but we specifically put the software on there because we found in interviewing customers they can't find their files. And if there's someone like Catherine or I, and we have like articles that we repurpose all the time, and I can look at the front page of a PowerPoint and know that that's the one, and I can have 30 versions. I'm a visual person, I need to see it. So I said, okay, well, tell me what's the name of this software, and they said, Cool Iris. And I said, well, so what you're telling me is that you're having a hard time communicating what the software does and the value to the customers. And they said, yes. And I said, and how are you doing that? And they said, well, we have this Harvey ball chart that we put up our competitors, and we have these, it's those little dots, like half circle, full circle, and look, we have more dots than anybody. And I said, okay, as an industry analyst or former, that's Harvey ball charts are like our sweet spot, we like that. But to the average consumer standing in Best Buy, they don't even, like, when I remember when I was picking up digital cameras, how many pixels does a girl need? 1, 10? I don't know. What is a pixel? I mean, I know what it is, but what I really wanted to know was, could I blow up the picture without it being blurry? So I said to them, I said, so what if, I said, do you remember the movie Monsters, Inc.? And they said, yeah. And I said, do you remember that little eyeball named Mike? And they said, yeah. And I said, we're going to invent Cool Iris. Cool Iris is going to be an eyeball, but she's going to be a girl. She's going to have a pink bow on, really big, long eyelashes, and she's going to be the voice of the brand. And she's going to teach people through her tweets and through her Facebook posts the value of the software and engage people. And they're like, oh, problem solved. Another short story, working with Shaw Flooring. So Shaw sells to places like Home Depot, so it's a B2B sale. And I was on the phone with 5 executives, and one guy said, oh, this social media stuff is really stupid. I don't even know why we're wasting our time in this call. And then the other spectrum was, Dr. Knapp, please, I know in my gut there's something here. And I said, okay, so let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to what do you want to happen in your business? And they said, well, when someone walks into Home Depot, we want them to ask for Shaw Flooring. And I said, that makes sense. I said, I've remodeled a couple of places, and I know that when I walk into a showroom, I'm just looking at reams and reams of stuff, but I'm really not a contractor, so I don't cognate which manufacturer. I said, and there's a problem in the remodeling industry. It's that the contractor never does what you say. So the bathroom ends up over here, the door ends up over here, and you're like, no, I just told you 2 hours ago, don't do that. Right? So there's a nightmare that goes on in the construction world. So I said, what if you made a destination community and you sponsored that quietly, and that invited homeowners as well as contractors to have a discussion, and the homeowners could rate the contractors, so kind of like an Angie's List or a Craigslist, where you could actually have the discussion and have people vet contractors. So you're solving a problem. And guess what? When people see that Shaw cares, there's an affinity towards that brand. So those are 2 examples of brands that don't necessarily seem like, what would you do? Like people said, well, what are we going to do? Put up pictures of carpeting and floor samples? So, right, because that's you think, oh, my product, right? Or the hard drive situation. How are we going to do this? So what you really need to do, and part of the reason that I went from being a Forrester analyst and a CRM management consulting person to going to the agency world, is I really felt like if I was going to be good at this, that I really needed to understand the whole spectrum of what you need in order to create a social brand. And so that experience in the agency really taught me, how do we look at this creative process to get out of our own ways, to get out of our normal marketing minds, and really create digital experiences.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. Do you have any questions? So, well, thank you, Natalie.
you.
So please give her a round of applause.